My name is Don Jolly. When I moved to Arizona, I took my daughters to Picacho Peak State Park, and there we found a sign talking about the Civil War in the Southwest. I was very curious because I've been a student in the Civil War and never heard anything happening in the Civil War in Arizona. Before the Civil War, Cochise has always been somewhat restless, but with the Army here, he was able to keep in check. When the war began, the Army was called back east, and Cochise didn't have any check on him. He started raiding the ranches and the villages around, and because of that, the stagecoach couldn't run anymore, going from town to town, and the money couldn't be transferred from bank to bank. So the banks had to close down, and a lot of commerce was ended. But the locals were upset, so they started what was known as the Arizona Rangers, a somewhat military force to keep the Apaches, the Chiricahua Apaches, in check. The North was financing the war from the gold and silver coming from California and Nevada, so the South was hoping that they could capture those areas and have that money come to them. So they organized an army under General Sibley, who was pretty much a drunk and had everything run by a second in command. But they started out in San Antonio and went to New Mexico and started attacking the small forts. There was one fort at Fort Union where Colonel Canby was, and he wouldn't come out and fight. But another force, and the Confederates clashed at a battle or a pass called Valverde Pass, which is a ford over the Rio Grande. And the Union had some cannons on one side, and the Confederates were trying to force the pass, or force the ford. Finally, they ordered 2 companies of lancers. These lances are long poles with a sharp point at the end that was captured in the Mexican War from the Mexican Army. So these 2 companies charged across the river. Well, lances didn't do well in the Civil War, and every single horse was shot down, and half the men were shot down. And what few survivors they had left at the end of the battle that night burned their lances in the campfires. After the battle, they sent 120 men towards Arizona to occupy Tucson. And there they raised the Confederate flag and made that the capital of the new territory. Instead of one big New Mexico territory, they cut it in half from the east to the west, with the Arizona territory in the bottom and the New Mexico territory in the top. And they had Tucson as the capital. It's interesting to know that the Union forces, or Union people in California, knew about the Texans coming into the Southwest. And they organized and gathered people from all over California, and they got about 2,350 men. They went to the Yuma Quartermaster Depot in Yuma, Arizona, across the Colorado River, and where they got outfitted with uniforms and equipment. And then they headed east. Now you just can't send 2,350 men out in the desert without planning. You can't send them all together, you have to break them up in groups, otherwise they'll outstrip the forage and the water. So they started sending them company at a time as they started heading east. They sent out Ford outposts to go gather hay at the different stage stations, so the horses could eat. And then they started gathering, ordering wheat to be ground up to flour from the Indian villages. They knew about the Confederates coming, and as they were going, they were practicing with their sabers, which are bigger than swords, and they'd swing those around. They called them wrist breakers because they were so big. And then they practiced trying to be soldiers on the way to meet this Texas force. The largest battle of these skirmishes that was going on in New Mexico happened at Glorieta. There, the Union forces, a combined force, was occupying a ranch called Pigeon Pass, and the Confederates were going up the pass, and they were winning all day long. They sent a group of Colorado cavalry around to hopefully flank the Confederates, but they didn't really flank them because I think they actually got lost. And they stumbled upon the rear guard of the Confederates, where all the supply wagons were. And they climbed down the mountain and attacked this, scared off the guard, and they bayoneted and shot over 500 mules and horses that were pulling the supply wagons of the Confederate Army. Okay, but even though the Confederates were winning the battle, they lost because that whole campaign suddenly came to a halt, because here they are, 3,500 Confederates out in the middle of a desert with no supplies, no blankets, no medicine, no food, and no more ammunition. They basically had to retreat. And while they did that, the Army lost discipline and they just completely disintegrated. They pulled off the wounded from the wagons and took the horses, a few horses they had, and they completely dissipated. So when they got to Texas, it was no longer a military force. Captain Sheridan, command of one of the contingents of the Arizona Rangers, started raiding some of these outposts that were supplying hay and was looking for the wheat that the Army had ordered. In the Pima Indian villages, he confronted the millwright and arrested him, took his place with his men. And so when Captain McCleve of the Union Army of the California Column showed up, he started talking to the millwright. And he asked him, so the California Column's coming, you guys are coming, you're going to save the day? He said, yes, we are. And how many men do you have? And Captain McCleve told him all the plans. So after that, Captain Sheridan arrested him and his men and took him prisoner and confiscated the flour that they had been ordered from the Pima Indian villages. At Stanwick Station, advanced parties of the California Column had set up piles of hay for the horses of the California Column. One night, when two guards were watching, a group of the Arizona Rangers under Captain Sheridan attacked. They fired and one of the soldiers was hit in the shoulder. The other soldier ran off about 100 yards where a company of the California Column was just bedding down. The horses were unsaddled, so they couldn't give chase. However, another company showed up, but their horses were tired and they couldn't catch up the Arizona Rangers. Sergeant Holmes of the Arizona Rangers was sent with about 10 men up to Picacho Peak to be a forward position to watch for the California Column. They had their men set up in camp, and then he sent 3 men out even further to watch out for the California Column. Being led by the scout John Jones, the California Column was led out to Picacho Peak, where the Confederates were at an outpost. The plan was devised that they would send one group of men, about 10 or 12 men, on one side of the outpost, and then another group, about 10 or 12, around the other side. And they were going to get behind the Confederates, and the main group would push them in, and they could be captured all, so they couldn't warn the group in Tucson. That was the plan, and Lieutenant Barrett took one of the sides, and John Jones was with him. As they got closer, John Jones said, look, right there they are, let's get behind them and we can capture them. And Lieutenant Barrett, maybe a little young and impetuous, said, no, we can take him. And they charged down there and started shooting at him. Well, the horses, not being used to the gunfire, immediately bucked off 3 of the Union soldiers. But they caught the 3 soldiers in the outpost and started tying them up. While they're tying them up, Lieutenant Barrett suddenly was shot by the other Confederates who heard the shooting and came to see what's going on. A gunfight ensued that would last about an hour and a half. And 2 other Union soldiers were hit. One was hit in the torso and it went through his back. And the other one was hit in the head, but the brass on his hat deflected the bullet and he survived. Another one was killed instantly. During the night, the soldier that was wounded moaned so loud, kept everyone awake, but finally he died in the morning. The next morning, the California Column went on to Tucson to capture him, but the people in Tucson decided, we can't take on this big column of people, so they retreated, giving up Tucson. California Column started pursuing after these Confederates, retreating back to Texas. And they came upon that same pass where they attacked the Confederates at Dragoon Springs. And the Apaches, still upset about what happened, attacked these soldiers. But they were in prepared positions with trenches and behind rocks. And the gunfight went on for quite a while. 2 people were killed on each side. But the Union California column, the Union troops had a mountain howitzer. They had set up that howitzer and started firing into that. And with that mountain howitzer, they killed 63 Indians. And the Indians decided to let them go. And they established a fort there to guard the trail, because Apache Pass was an important pass-through from New Mexico to Arizona. There's an interesting battle at Picacho Peak where it culminated. One thing, it spans 2,500 miles from Texas to California. And what was interesting is that the troops in California could not communicate to the troops in the forts in New Mexico. However, the Texans and the California column knew what each other were doing, which is an interesting battle. So anyway, because the California column showed up, the Confederates failed their mission to take the Southwest and the silver fields of Nevada and the gold in California, and they didn't pursue it anymore going into the Southwest.